So thank you for joining this FAFSA simplification applying for financial aid presentation hosted by the Financial Aid Office at Wabash College. So this is a good mixture of audience. We have a little bit of everyone, and everyone is invited. So whether you're a prospective student or parent, or current student or parent, or some kind of staff or faculty person or a friend of the college, welcome. We're excited to have you. These changes to the FAFSA are very significant, and we're excited that you all decided to spend some time with us to go through them. I do want to kind of point out some things before we get started. I do have two of my colleagues with me. So April Bradley, you see there, and Laura, if you could maybe show your video for a second so you flash to the top so people can see your username. There you go. So Fry LAU there, and then April Bradley will be in the background to help out. So if you do have any questions, feel free to share them in the chat. April and Laura will be monitoring that as we go. They will sometimes answer them. They might flag them for me to talk about or elaborate on. And of course, this is a public setting. This is being recorded, and we hope to publish it on our website for folks that could not make the meeting. That being said, I would refrain from sharing any sensitive information about yourself. We are always happy, and we'll share later on how you make an appointment with us and how you get in touch with us in the future to talk about the kind of more personal items that can be related to financial aid. So that being said, we will send out the presentation to you all who want to see it, or want kind of a transcript or a PDF version of what I'm about to go through. So if you wouldn't mind sending me a direct message with your name and email of where you want that to go, we'll make sure that we get that within the next couple of days followed up to you with any other information as well. So I would not, other than sending me your name and your email right now, try not to send me a direct message for the remainder of the session, because since I'll be presenting, I really won't be able to see them. But please reach out to April and Laura, or just send a general message into the chat, which should work perfectly. So awesome. We'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit more about me. My name is Alex DeLonis. I am the Associate Dean for Enrollment Management and Director of Financial Aid here at Wabash College. I've been with the college for about 5 years now. And prior to Wabash, I also was the Director of Financial Aid at Ivy Tech Community College in downtown Indianapolis. And then prior to that, I was with 2 different community colleges in the state of Illinois. So I'll talk a little bit more about my background as we go as it pertains to financial aid and FAFSA simplification. So we have a lot to cover. We're definitely going to take the full hour. I had to really dig in and pick and choose about what I wanted to spend more time on, because to give you an idea, the National Training Conference for Financial Aid, we had a lot of sessions on FAFSA simplification, probably 6 or 7 sessions worth on FAFSA simplification, and they were all different. So there's a lot here. There's a lot here to go over, but I got the information I thought was most important for this group to have. So we're going to go just an overview of FAFSA simplification and what you should be looking at. There are multiple parts of FAFSA simplification, so we're going to talk about 24-25 mostly. And there's a difference between the user experience that will change, but there's also the formula that has changed. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And there's been some delays, and I'll give you some details about the delay and the impact there. And then we'll connect you with some resources, and there will be time for some Q&A at the end if we wanted to chat for a little bit. But like I said, if you have a question, go ahead and send it in the chat, and we'll try to tackle it as we go. So how did we get here, right? So I like to throw this in here just to say, this is not Wabash just doing weird stuff. right? These are laws that we are responding to, and that we're required to follow through with these changes as it pertains to financial aid. So everything we do kind of starts with the Higher Education Act. But then recently, you had the Future Act and the FAFSA Simplification Act that came in and changed the laws and changed how we administer these things. So the Future Act made way for the direct data exchange with the IRS, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the FAFSA Simplification Act simply built upon that in a lot of the other changes that we've seen. And then there have been some corrections along the way. The biggest one being these changes were actually supposed to all be implemented a little while ago, but the feds knew well in advance they weren't going to be able to deliver in the 23-24 academic year. So a lot of them have been pushed to the 24-25 academic year. So I myself have been a part of the National Association of Financial Aid FAFSA Simplification Implementation Working Group since April 2021. So I've been very, very close to the implementation and the changes that have come along here. And our work got extended yet again into through June 2024. And we'll kind of see how things are going to see if we continue to need the group. But we work closely with NASFA and the Department of Education to take feedback from aid directors on the impact of the changes. Now, I can't say that the Department of Education took everything into consideration, or all of our changes were implemented, but that's okay. That's okay. At least we got a seat at the table. And if things weren't all able to be implemented this year, maybe there's a possibility for future years. So this is directly from the Department of Ed to give you an idea of the range of changes that we're looking at that came with FAFSA simplification. So you can see the changes actually started all the way back in the award year 21-22, with most of the things through 23-24 being finished. But you see there's 6 bullet points for 24-25 that have not been checked off. Now, we're supposed to get a FAFSA in December. Last time I checked, it is December. So that's a handful of bullet points there that the department still has not finished up. And we're supposed to have a finished FAFSA here within the next few weeks. So this is something that we're monitoring closely to see, how this might impact the delivery of the FAFSA. But to give you an idea of everything that went into getting this up and running, there's actually a lot that has already been checked off to this point. All right, so everything I'll be talking today, it will be the FAFSA information, free application for federal student aid and applying for federal aid. And if you're from the state of Indiana, state aid. This application is used by the schools to determine, or we will figure out your eligibility when you complete this for federal aid, state aid, and Wabash money. So this is going to be for incoming students. This is going to be for current students. Usually the FAFSA is available every October 1st. Unfortunately, kind of if you're thinking back to the previous slide, a lot of those changes, they have not finished up. That being said, they were not able to deliver the FAFSA by October 1st this year. We have been told for this year, and hopefully this year only, the FAFSA will be delayed until maybe December 31st at the latest, right? So that's good. But the most recent update we even received is that colleges won't actually get that FAFSA data until about February. Why that matters? If you're able to do your FAFSA December 31st, and I'm sure you're all going to have a New Year's Eve party and a FAFSA completion party. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to love it. But when you complete your FAFSA, usually in a regular year, we would receive that FAFSA within a week in our system. Now what they're saying is if you complete that FAFSA on January 1st, The school, Wabash, or this is a nationwide issue, schools won't actually receive it until about 30 days later. That is going to cause delays in Wabash and other schools being able to deliver an aid offer to you as soon as we can. To give you a more realistic timeline, if we do not indeed receive ICERs, or I'm sorry, FAFSA data until the beginning of February, it's likely that incoming students, so new students, will not receive their first aid offer until maybe the beginning to middle of March, which will probably be very similar to other schools that you're looking at as well. Currently enrolled students generally will receive their aid offers a little bit later. Honestly, about March is when we would usually do it. So that means currently enrolled students will be delayed a little bit as well. If you receive any kind of need-based assistance, when you were admitted to Wabash, you would have seen your merit award. Any need-based assistance from completing the FAFSA, you must complete the FAFSA every single year. We've been told at this time that starting for 25-26, the opening of the FAFSA will go back to October 1st. It's only this year that we're really dealing with this delay. So there's going to be some new language that, you know, with financial aid, there's always a lot of acronyms. I'll help everyone through this, but you may have heard the phrase EFC a lot. EFC is gone. We're moving on to the SAI. Another common one that you might remember is the IRS data retrieval. And we'll actually begin using the phrase DDX. So the other ones are important too. We'll talk a little bit about FTI and some of the other changes of tax information. But the key ones I think that most people will need to understand is that when you complete your FAFSA, you do all that work, all that hard work. Right at the end, they're going to give you this magic number. It used to be called the EFC, the Expected Family Contribution Number. It will now be called the SAI. And this is a number that schools will use to calculate your need-based aid eligibility. Okay. And then the IRS data retrieval is gone. And we have now changed to the direct data exchange. And I'll definitely go into detail on that. So I'm going to go over some highlights. I'm going to go over some big highlights on what has changed and some things to look out for as you're thinking about getting the FAFSA completed. So this is the first year that everyone must have an FSA ID in order to complete a FAFSA. The good news is getting an FSA ID is something you can do today. Most people should be able to get an FSA ID right now. I will say, I always joke that it sometimes takes longer to get an FSA ID than it does to actually complete the FAFSA. And especially if you're doing it for 3 people, maybe a student and a parent or 2, yeah, it's definitely going to take you longer to get the FSA IDs than it will be to complete the actual FAFSA. But the good news is, even though the FAFSA is not available, the process to get an FSA ID is here. So you can do that as soon as possible. If you
on the thing.
Well, if you already have a FAFSA, I'm sorry, if you already have an FSA ID that you've used in the past because of a former application or another kid that you had in college, your FSA ID is still good. Nothing to worry about there. But if you've never had an FSA ID, you can go in and get one now. I will point out there will be a process if you're a parent or if you're a parent without a social security number for one reason or the other, you will be able to get an FSA ID, which you used to not be able to. It is very important, and you'll see the bottom bullet point. I'm kind of skipping down a little bit, but the reason it's extremely important to get that FSA ID is when you do that, you also, during the process of completing the FAFSA, you will provide consent for the Department of Education to get your tax information directly from the IRS and input that information into the FAFSA. Even if you haven't filed taxes, like most students, likely would not have filed a tax return, and that's okay. You'll still need to provide that consent, and they will confirm that you did indeed not file a tax return. If you do not provide consent, you are not eligible for aid. So if anyone that is supposed to contribute to the FAFSA for a student does not provide this consent, the student is automatically not eligible for aid. In there, it is that black and white. So this part is extremely important. The FSA ID is extremely important, and providing that consent to go into the IRS's system and bring back that tax info is required in order to get through the application. One piece we'll talk about is who is supposed to contribute to the FAFSA, right? So of course the student, we need your information, but who else is supposed to be there? So just very quickly, it is a role-based application, and in the past, the student or the parent might have been able to fill in the other person's section. That will not be this year. You will not be able to do that. This is also the first year that one family might have to get 3 FSA IDs. So it will be very clean if you're the student and you have one parent. That's fine. You'll do 2 FSA IDs, one for the student, one for the parent. If your parents filed a joint tax return, you also only need 2 FSA IDs, one for the student and one for one of the parents. Now, in the situation where your both parents are married, and maybe file separate tax returns, married filing separate, or some other status, both parents will need an FSA ID in order to do the exchange, in order to and provide consent to go over into the IRS system and bring that tax data back over. If a parent has remarried in that situation, or I'm sorry, if in the divorced family household, the parent who provides the majority of the financial support for the student is the parent that needs to be on the FAFSA. And if that parent has remarried, then the step parent's information and tax info will have to go on the FAFSA. And it's possible that the step parent might also have to provide consent. So when you're completing the FAFSA, you will be presented with a series of questions. They're actually calling it a parent wizard, which I think is fantastic. But as you're going through the parent wizard, they will actually help you determine which parent or set of parents should be the contributors to the FAFSA. And there are some, of course, some unusual or special circumstances that might not allow for parents' information to be obtained. And I'll cover that a little bit later. But just knowing our student population and the students we work with here at Wabash, most of our students are going to be dependent students. You will be asked a series of questions on the FAFSA that will determine if you're independent or not. Starting with, are you around 24 years of age? Are you married? Are you a veteran of the armed forces? Are you an orphan or ward of the court? Are you or were you in a legal guardianship? Are you an emancipated minor? Like, there's a few more. Are you homeless or at risk of being homeless? I throw those out there because those are all very significant life changes. The thought of, well, I don't live with my parents and they don't pay my bills, but you're still under the age of 24 and you can't mark any of those other boxes. Well, then you're going to have to provide your parents' information as a dependent student. So one other thing I'll kind of point out there, because as I do FAFSA nights, this is actually where I spend a lot of my time with follow-up questions. So I'm trying to hit everything up front, as many things as I can think of. If you have a divorced parent situation and one parent pays child support to the other parent, so you're supposed to put the parent who provides the majority of your financial support. If that child support that one parent is paying to the other is more than half of your financial support, then that is the parent. The child support payer is the parent that should be on the FAFSA. Okay. even if you do not live with that parent, it all comes down to who provides the majority of your financial support. Within the parent wizard, it will ask you that question. If you say 50-50, it's right down the middle. Both parents provide the exact same amount of money. It will actually then ask you, okay, then it's the parent that has the greater income and assets. So that's the tiebreaker. That's the parent you should be listing at that point. So there's been a huge change to number in college within the formula. So, and I'll talk a little bit about why this matters. And it used to be, you will definitely, and that's the next bullet down, it's going to ask you about family size. And I will say from experience, the two biggest drivers in your eligibility, what calculates the SAI, is going to be your family size versus your adjusted gross income, your family adjusted gross income. So that being said, the change to family size, where they're no longer going to take into consideration how many siblings or how many dependents are in college at the same time, can be significant. Now, if you've been eligible for the Pell Grant or think you might be eligible for the Pell Grant, most students in that income range or families in that income range haven't necessarily been impacted based on the analysis we've run. And generally, with FAFSA simplification, more families are going to be eligible for Pell Grants than ever before. So that is very good news. When we ran our analysis, however, it was the families that didn't necessarily qualify for federal or state aid. It was the families in the kind of middle income where we saw that their eligibility would fly all over the place. That would have changed their eligibility for Wabash need-based assistance, about generous amounts of need-based grant assistance. So every time we kind of dug in on that data, we could kind of see that the reason that eligibility was flying all around was because of the change to number in college. I will let you know that Wabash, for our institutional aid purposes, will continue to take that into consideration. But for federal and state aid purposes, it will no longer be taken into consideration. John, did you have a question? Nope. Okay. So yeah, that is a big change. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. Like I said, when we calculate your aid eligibility, whether you're an incoming student or you're a currently enrolled student, we will still take this into consideration. The odd thing about it is the question is still on the FAFSA. So you will still be asked this question. It just won't have an impact on the formula, oddly enough. All right. So you can list up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA instead of 10. So yeah, you can just list Wabash 20 times. So that should work. And we already talked a little bit about choosing the right parent and kind of the role of contributors. But again, as I've done these across the country, that has been where I've spent the most on follow-up questions. So definitely, if you have any other questions, submit those into the chat. I promised this information a little bit earlier for the process with parents with no Social Security numbers. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it now, but what I did want to do is, again, you can DM me your email and your name, and I'll make sure you get a copy of the presentation. There are a few slides in here that are directly related to that. And we will obviously we'll have these slides in there so you can review them and gather more info. But long story short, there is an identity verification process for that parent who does not have a Social Security number before you could get an FSA ID and verify your identity. So here's the process here. And these slides I actually took directly from the Department of Education on exactly how the process should work. Okay, so I'm going to dig a little bit now into the actual formula, which I'm sure is the most riveting information I think you've ever seen. So when you're completing your FAFSA, on the confirmation page, they generally will tell you what your EFC or SAI is. So for 23-24 EFC, we're now switching to SAI. The lowest an EFC used to be able to go was a 0. The lowest it can now go, an SAI now can go, is a negative 1,500. So not to confuse you, but the lowest it can go is negative 1,500. And Pell eligibility this year will be calculated different than it has ever before. But the idea is more families will be eligible for Pell. So I'll take the changes. That's all good news. It will first evaluate you to see if you're eligible for the maximum Pell Grant, which is about $7,500 for the year. It's a good chunk of change. If you're not eligible for Max Pell, you'll still be considered for the minimum Pell Grant. And then in between minimum and maximum, you could be eligible for somewhere in between. We call it calculated Pell. So that's just a matter of taking Max Pell and subtracting your SAI to come up with how much Pell eligibility there is. Now, looking at the next slide. Nope, I lied. No, I'm right. So a few things that would automatically qualify you for Max Pell is if no one in the family filed a tax return for that year. And remember, we're looking at 2-year-old data here. So for 24-25, we're looking at 2022 taxes. If no one in the household filed a tax return, it is that simple. The family is going to be eligible for Max Pell. And then you have the next one, which is a little more rare. And then you have low income students. The poverty tables, if you're looking at these, depending on if you're independent or dependent, if you're below one of these household incomes, if you did file a tax return and you're below one of these household incomes, you're eligible for Max Pell. We will likely post these tables on our website for families to try to look through early to see if their income is below that threshold. There's also some other tools that you can use that I'll go over to kind of see if you'd be eligible for Max Pell even before you did a FAFSA. And I appreciate that transparency. So other formula changes. I talked a little bit about some of these. Child support received is now counted as an asset instead of income. So that will impact the formula a little bit different. One thing I want to point out is small business and family farm exclusions were eliminated. So the reason I point that out is because it used to be if you owned a small business, or if you owned a small business specifically, and you had less than 100 employees, you didn't actually have to report the net worth of your business. They took that exclusion away. So the same exact question will be on the FAFSA. They just took away that 100 employee exclusion. So when you're going through the FAFSA, if this isn't a question you normally had to answer, you may have to answer it this time if you're a small business owner. So not only would you normally, naturally, when you do the direct data exchange and you bring over your tax information into the FAFSA, it will report the income side of things. But then for assets, you'll also have to report the net worth of your small business. And there will be a little bit of an explanation in the FAFSA as to kind of exactly how you do that. And then many of our families will be impacted by the family farm exclusion. We're still waiting for a little bit of guidance on this one because it's not something that has been taken into consideration before, but you will have to list the net worth of your family farm if you do indeed own one, and that used to never be the case. We talked about number in college not being taken into consideration, and if you have, there will be a series of questions that asks about your eligibility for means-tested benefits. If you have received SNAP benefits or WIC or another means-tested benefit that they ask about, then your assets, you won't be asked the asset questions as you're going through the FAFSA. So that is very good news. So yeah, you can see as much of a hard time as I like to give the Department of Education, you can see that there's a lot of changes here. And they did have a limited time to get all of these in. So that has kind of led into the FAFSA delay, and we're all kind of dealing with it together. So now I wanted to dig into the actual FAFSA experience a little bit. So we talked about the changes, and now we'll talk about kind of how you do this application. So if you've never done a FAFSA before, you're in pretty good position because nothing should catch you off guard because it's going to be a new experience. If you have done a FAFSA before, it will look and feel completely different than it was before. Like I said, the importance of getting that FSA ID right now is crucial. If you sit down to do the FAFSA without an FSA ID, it won't be able to do the direct data exchange for you. And you're probably going to have to sit down and do it again at some point. So just wanted to throw that out there. Everyone has to have their FSA ID. You're going to use it all the years, and you should not share that FSA ID. But this is a screenshot of what that like getting started screen would look like. This one is kind of who's starting. So either the student or the parent can actually start the FAFSA application. So you can kind of have this view, and I'm going to go down the student path, but the parent could just as easily start the FAFSA as a parent, and kind of move along the process that way. And then the contributors, right? So we talked a little bit about who should be the parent on the FAFSA. So you will be able to invite that person once you determine, talking to your family, if it's anything outside of married parents who file a joint tax return, then you're going to have a conversation of who should be the right parent on the FAFSA. Once you get that far, if you're the student who started it, you will put in the parent's information who you want to invite. It will prompt you for a social security number. So parents, if your student asks you for a social security number, you know why, because they're trying to send you an invite to actually contribute to the FAFSA. Now, nothing's stopping you all from kind of sitting down and doing this together, but you will kind of have to log in separately with those FSA IDs. And it does give you kind of some information down there that's helpful as far as what documents you'll need to go through this. So you'll get that invitation. You will be emailed that invitation. So make sure you put in a reliable email. If you're a student in high school, do not use a high school email. You will lose access to that at one point, and that will create issues trying to get back into your FSA ID at other times. So definitely do not use that. Use you can create a free Gmail or something like that. If you don't have one, it'll make the process much smoother. But again, if a parent starts the FAFSA, they could also prompt the student to take action. If you invite a contributor, or you start a section and you don't do anything for 45 days, it will be deleted and you will have to start over. So if you start it and nothing is submitted within 45 days, you will have to end up starting over, which is kind of rough. So make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row before going through the process. We don't want it to be delayed. So in the case of someone being independent, if married, you will need your spouse's information as well. You will have to provide that consent to do the transfer. We talked about that. And that's all contributors. And sometimes, if necessary, also for step parents. Students, parents, and preparers. If you use a paid preparer, they can start it, but they may not provide consent on your behalf. So you will still have to have some interaction with the FAFSA because the preparer will not be able to provide consent for you. And the Indiana state grant impact still is a little unknown. Okay. So we know a little bit, but we don't know all of the pieces there. So that's something that Wabash will be monitoring as far as if there would be a change in eligibility for families there. But for right now, nothing you need to worry about. Just wanted to throw that out there that it does these changes do impact state aid if you're on here and you're from Indiana. Okay, so I referenced earlier that the information, when you complete the FAFSA, it's 2-year-old tax information, right? So it's from 2022, and we know a lot has changed since then. So there's a couple different things we can take into consideration as far as special circumstances go. One is unusual circumstances, and I'll talk about that now. And that was the piece where I said very few people will fall into this, but if you're a dependent age student who is trying to do the FAFSA, and all of those questions that I asked earlier that would trigger you to be an independent student, if you can't answer yes to any of them, but you still cannot provide your parents' information, that's something you'd want to talk to us about, and we can help you through the process. You should be able to complete the FAFSA as a provisional independent student, but then you'll likely have to follow up with us about next steps. And there would definitely be next steps that we would have to do. And then we'd kind of have to collect some documentation and go from there. Another part of special circumstances are just a change in circumstance, a change in household income, household size, things like that. So, and I'll kind of go to the next slide. These are some of the things that we can take into consideration, and it's definitely not limited to this. So we never recommend that you go into your FAFSA and say, well, my income has changed since 2022, so I'm just going to change the information on the FAFSA. That will actually mess things up. Don't do that. Answer the questions as they are on the FAFSA, and then follow up with us. We can take all of these things into consideration. We'll have to collect documentation and things like that. We have the magical powers to go into your FAFSA and update the information to your current situation, or one that more accurately reflects your current situation rather than a situation from 2 years ago. So if that's you, if you feel like, when you did your FAFSA, that income that you entered isn't really reflective of your current situation, please contact us, make an appointment, and we can go through that together. Okay, so what can you be doing right now if the FAFSA won't be available for a few more weeks, and schools won't even get the information until February? One thing that you can do is use the federal estimator tool, and I have a link there that you can click, or go to their website, go to studentaid.gov. You can play around with this tool. It's very similar to completing a FAFSA, but not necessarily going through the entire process. And it will actually tell you a little bit of information if you're eligible for the Pell Grant, what your SAI is, and that'll help you as you're doing your planning. Wabash also has a net price calculator that works very similar. And at the end, it will actually generate an estimated kind of aid package, as you will, from Wabash. We try to get them as accurate as possible, but sometimes they're only as accurate as the information that you put into them. But it's something that we can use to get an idea of the cost prior to being able to complete the FAFSA. And then, of course, the link to do an FSA ID and get that done as soon as possible. It does take a few days to go through the Social Security Administration and all the different checks there. So make sure that you do that as soon as you can, definitely before the FAFSA is released, so that you can hit the ground running. And then I put this link out there because I appreciate it. It's like how to complete the FAFSA and all the different documentation that you can start gathering before you even get to that point. So there's a lot of prep that you can do, a lot of planning, a lot of research that you can be doing right now in order to get prepared to complete that FAFSA. All right, so I left plenty of time for questions. And I can actually stop sharing my screen. Let's see. There we go. So yeah, and I have not looked at the chat in a while. I know folks have been asking questions through there, but if you had something that you wanted to make sure got covered, feel free to take yourself off mute and we can talk about it now, or feel free to send it into the chat. Especially if there was something you were hoping that I covered that I just didn't get to. There was some info listed on the last slide to have ready when completing the FAFSA. Can you share those items again? The last slide, let's see. Oops. Number in family equals number of dependents. I'm going to reshare my screen. Hold on. So number in family, does the number in family equal the number of dependents? So they are going to, when you're figuring out your household, your family size, when you're figuring out your family size, it is actually the questions you're going to ask yourself are, for most of these are going to be dependent student families based on the parent's household. So for the parent, you're always going to list the student, the parents, and anyone who the parents provide the majority of the financial support for. So that's the general rule. Now, when you do the FTI and the transfer, that information will pull over the dependents from your tax data or exemptions, whatever they're calling them these days. But that number will actually come over from the IRS. So when it does that, the FAFSA will actually ask you, it won't show you the number. So make sure you're aware of what the number is when you do your 2022 tax, or when you've done your 2022 taxes, make sure you are aware of what that number is, because it will ask you, has the number of dependents changed since filing your tax return? And if so, what is it? And then you can manually enter your family size at that time, and it will override what came over on the taxes. As institutions, we do not have to list, we do not have to use the tax data that for family size. That's what automatically comes over. But if there's an update, you would want to just come over and manually enter that information. And then the school, we won't question it. We will just take the one that you manually entered. But that's a great question. That is a great question. And then I'm not exactly sure what slide. So if April or Laura or whoever's asking the question about what slide you want to see, just let me know what slide, because I'm not exactly sure.
I think there was a slide, Alex, that you had listed items to have on hand when completing the FAFSA.
Okay. I know I mentioned it, but I don't recall a slide that had those things. Yeah, I don't recall that slide. I know there's a resources slide. I'll put that back up. That's what I thought we were talking about. And then there's a link that will take you to how to prepare for the FAFSA, but I did not list those things out.
Oh, she said you passed it.
Oh, I did?
So
okay.
the onboarding slide.
Oh, okay. Onboarding slide. Oh, you're right. Documents you need. Yeah. See? Thank you. Perfect. There it is. Okay.
Yes, that one.
Yeah. See, teamwork. Oh, I like Ellen. That one. Great questions. What other questions? Do college graduates count in number in college? They can. So it all goes back to, do you still provide more than half of that person's financial support? And if asked, could you document it? So That's what it comes down to. If that college graduate is still living in your household, you're paying the mortgage, they're eating your food, you're paying for their car, you're helping them pay their graduate tuition. I would argue, yeah, you should have them in the household. You know, but it is as simple as, do you provide more than half of their support? And it doesn't have to be, we know families come in all different shapes and sizes. It does not have to be you know, just mom and dad and kids. If you provide substantial support for an elderly parent or grandparent, or if you're taking care of, if your niece lives with you because of a family situation and you're providing support for your niece or something like that, all of that is fine, as long as you can document, if ever asked, as long as you can document that you provide more than half of the financial support. Okay. What else? If we completed a FAFSA 9 years ago, would that be the same parent FSA ID, or do we create a new one? That should still be the same FSA ID. Yeah, so you'll probably be locked out, is my guess. So you'll probably be prompted to you know, answer some questions or some security questions. Very worst case scenario, you'll have to contact the Department of Education in order to get it unlocked. But once it's tied to your social security number, you're good. You're good. So if a negative 1,500 is the minimum SAI, does that mean the index would be eligible for maximum aid, or what exactly does negative 1,500 mean? Or is there a range? So, great question. Negative 1,500, anything 0 and below is eligible for the Max Pell Grant. Negative 1,500, we thought we were going to be able to do more with that. We thought that maybe, since it was a negative number, we would be able to award a family more than their cost of attendance. None of that is true. We've been told, as a financial aid office, from a rule standpoint, when you see a negative SAI, treat it as a 0 when you're calculating. It is rather confusing, but if you see an SAI of a 0 or any negative number, you're still eligible for Max Pell. And I will say, generally, you phase out Pell at about whatever Max Pell is, right? So if your SAI is greater than about 7,500, you won't have eligibility for Pell Grant unless you qualify for the minimum Pell Grant award, which is a possibility as well. And the minimum Pell Grant is just a smaller fraction of the Pell Grant, of the maximum Pell Grant. So it'll still be something, though. And we do at Wabash have some different programs for Pell Grant recipients and for other folks that you can take a look at on our website. But we tie a lot of our programs to if you have Pell Grant eligibility. So I would start using the tools right now to determine, maybe see if you're eligible for Pell before we get a FAFSA later on. But to answer your question, yeah, I'd say once your SAI gets above about a 7,500, if you're eligible for Pell, it will be very little. But you could still be eligible for a significant amount of Wabash institutional aid. We will still give institutional aid well beyond Pell Grant range. So that's at least the good news there. Do families have a decent income, receive those monies, or is it reserved for public? I will say that is a great question. Yes, it goes back to your family size versus household income. So if a family makes $100,000, but it's just mom and student, they're going to be eligible for a lot less aid than the same $100,000, and there's 5 family members in the household, right? So I can't give you this like clean number as to what it would be, because it really does depend on your entire FAFSA application. But is it possible for a family to make more than six figures and be eligible for Pell? Yeah, it is possible. But yeah, in general, the higher that income climbs, the less you're going to be eligible for. But I think what families are generally surprised at is still how much institutional aid they can still be eligible for at Wabash, even though they're not a Pell Grant eligible family. So don't simply count yourself out, especially at Wabash, if you're not a Pell Grant recipient. We definitely give generous aid packages and need-based grants to families, a lot of families who make well over six figures. What was the thinking around excluding the number of kids in the college calculation? Great question. First off, I'll say it wasn't my decision, I promise. It was a change in the law. The good news is, and thanks, April, for sharing that link. The good news is more families will be eligible for more Pell Grants. And I think the department got that right. I think, though, they spent a lot of their energy and philosophy with the formula targeted at that group. And I personally think that middle income families kind of were an afterthought for the department, because those are families where Wabash gives a significant amount of aid, but the federal government doesn't, right? So it probably wasn't, it just wasn't a priority for Congress when these laws were passed. I will say I have seen conversations of this solving an equity issue, because if you think about a family that has twins who goes through school at the same exact time, or maybe kids that were 1 year apart, they benefited from that split of the EFC. Now, think about me. I have two kids. Well, I guess my kids are closer to age, but imagine my kids were farther in age. Maybe they were 6 years apart in age. I still have to pay for two college educations, and I don't benefit from any EFC split for number in college, but I still have to pay for the same amount of college educations as someone who had twins. So some have argued that it makes it actually more equitable for families in that situation. But I was not in the room when they passed the laws. I will say that the number one priority, though, for the feds during that, for Congress, was on the neediest families, and my gut just tells me the middle income families, and if they were negatively impacted by the formula, it wasn't a high priority for the department there. How does one go about requesting Wabash institutional aid? How is that aid dispersed? Great question. Wabash aid is split into two pots, I will say. Our merit aid, which all students are awarded upon admission, but that's only a percentage of the story. And then in order to apply for Wabash institutional aid, you need to do that FAFSA. So unfortunately, if for incoming and current students, the FAFSA is just not available, and it won't still be available until the end of this month. So make it a priority, get your FSA ID, do the FAFSA as soon as possible. Once we receive FAFSAs, and like I said, probably around early March-ish, as long as there are no other setbacks, we'll begin sending out aid offers to families to let them know how much aid they would be eligible for. And that includes, like Laura said there, the FAFSA will include all federal, state, and Wabash money. Will also include loans and work money as well. So people are, obviously you should be focused on the free money because that's most important. But we will also include information on student loans and federal work study if eligible. So that's an application. The FAFSA covers a lot of info there, a lot of aid types from a lot of different sources. Probably have time for one more question. Hopefully I covered everything. I think I got another direct message here. So for currently enrolled students, yes, if you did the FAFSA last year, even though the FAFSA experience will change, everything about the FSA ID will carry over. So if you're a currently enrolled student who did a FAFSA in previous years, your FSA ID is good. Right. Yeah. So I'll just kind of close with this. Stay tuned for more information. This has been recorded, and we will get it on our website as soon as possible if you wanted to go back to look for it. However, if you dropped your name, if you DM'd me your name and your email address, I'll make sure to send you the slides. So if you haven't done that, feel free to do it before you leave, and I'll make sure that gets done. Great question. We will be having some additional financial aid nights. Usually we do a couple a year. And this was the one that we used to talk about applying for aid, but there's no FAFSA available, right? So we had to change it up a little bit. But yeah, we will sound the alarm when that FAFSA is available and it can be done. And then we will do another webinar in the spring that talks about going through your financing options, right? Like, so you've got your aid offer. Now let's talk about the aid offer and then some of the other options to pay for college. So my contact info, my email address, I'm dropping in the chat right now. It was on that last slide. Oh, whoops, I accidentally DM'd it to someone.
And Alex,
yeah.
I also put the financial aid calendar link in the chat. We do have times available to meet with someone in the financial aid office over Zoom or over the phone or in person. Those appointments are Monday through Thursday we have slots from 10, 11, 1, 2, and 3, Monday through Thursday.
Yeah, thank you, April. Okay. I appreciate, and yes, we will send, we have a planned communication ready to go out to everyone. It'll be on every social media. It'll go on every listserv. It'll hit every student we have an email for once that FAFSA is available and on the streets. So get that done as soon as possible. And then we unfortunately won't be able to follow up with you until later in February, beginning of March. But please stay tuned for that information. And anytime in between, reach out to us and we can answer any questions. So thank you so much. Thanks for dropping your emails in the chat. We'll go ahead and get this out once it's ready. And thanks for spending a night with us, and have a good one. And we hope to see you around campus soon. Thank you so much.